My beloved child. Do not move past this moment too quickly. Something hidden has shifted in the heart of the person you have carried quietly within yours, and what happened when they finally understood the truth about you was far more emotional than they ever expected. You may have spent days wondering whether they understood your silence, your intentions, your loyalty, or the things you could never properly explain. You may even have accepted that they had already formed their opinion and nothing could change it. But while you were learning how to live without being understood, something happened inside them. A truth reached the place where their assumptions had been living, and when it did, the walls they had built around their certainty began to fall. Stay here, because the deepest part has not yet been revealed. They did not simply change their mind about you. They were forced to confront the possibility that they had judged something precious through the lens of their own fear. And when that realization settled into their heart, there was no audience around them, no dramatic conversation, no one watching their face. There was only silence. And in that silence, emotions they had been controlling for far too long finally escaped. They cried. Not because someone told them to feel guilty. Not because they suddenly became weak. They cried because memories began returning differently. Moments they had once interpreted one way suddenly carried another meaning. Your silence no longer looked like indifference. Your distance no longer looked like punishment. Your patience no longer looked like weakness. Even certain words you had spoken, words they barely noticed when you said them, began echoing back with a clarity that made them wonder how they could have misunderstood you so deeply. And heaven saw the moment their heart whispered a question they had been avoiding: what if I was wrong about them? That question changed everything. There are realizations that arrive gently, and there are realizations that enter like light through a room that has been dark for years. This was the second kind. They began remembering the times you tried without announcing how much effort it cost you. They remembered moments when you could have walked away but chose patience instead. They remembered how you protected their feelings even while your own heart was carrying confusion. And suddenly, what they had called complicated began looking like devotion wearing imperfect clothes. You must understand something important. They had built a story about you inside their mind. Some pieces of that story came from things they witnessed. Some came from assumptions. Some came from fear. And some may have come from the opinions of people who never truly understood what existed between you. Little by little, those pieces formed a picture that felt convincing enough for them to believe. But convincing is not the same as true. And recently, one small detail disturbed that entire picture. At first, they tried to ignore it. They told themselves it meant nothing. They attempted to continue thinking about you exactly as they had before. Yet something inside them would not cooperate. Their heart kept returning to one memory, then another, then another. It was as though an invisible hand was turning old pages in a book they thought they had already finished reading. Only this time, they were noticing the sentences they had skipped. They remembered your eyes during a particular moment when you were trying to appear stronger than you felt. They remembered how your voice changed when something mattered deeply to you. They remembered a conversation where you stopped explaining yourself, and for the first time they wondered whether you stopped because you had nothing to say, or because you realized they were no longer listening. That thought hurt them. Because somewhere beneath everything, they knew the answer. You had not always gone silent because you stopped caring. Sometimes you went silent because explaining yourself again felt like begging someone to see a truth you had already shown through your actions. And this is where their tears truly began. There was one memory they could not escape. It returned unexpectedly, almost painfully. A moment between you that seemed ordinary when it happened, yet now carried enormous weight. Perhaps you said something sincere. Perhaps you offered reassurance. Perhaps you stayed calm while they were emotionally distant. Whatever form that memory took inside this fictional story, its meaning changed the instant they viewed it without defensiveness. For the first time, they saw you without the filter of their fear. And what they saw shook them. They saw someone who had been trying. Someone imperfect, yes, but sincere. Someone who had feelings they never fully understood. Someone who may have carried hurt quietly because they did not want to turn love into a battlefield. Their chest tightened as another realization arrived. While they were questioning whether you cared, you may have been questioning whether it was safe to keep showing how much you cared. Think about the weight of that realization. Two hearts could be standing on opposite sides of the same misunderstanding, each believing the other had chosen distance, when beneath that distance both were protecting wounds neither knew how to name. This is why you must not confuse silence with emptiness. Sometimes silence is where truth gathers enough courage to become visible. And their silence has been full. Full of replayed conversations. Full of questions. Full of regret. Full of imaginary conversations with you that they have never spoken aloud. They have wondered what they would say if you suddenly appeared before them with no warning and asked only one question: "Do you understand me now?" That question has followed them. Because now they are beginning to understand something they could not see before. You were not asking them to believe you blindly. You were asking them to look beyond appearances. You were asking them to recognize the difference between what fear suggested and what your actions actually showed. But they were not ready then. Something inside them was still protecting an old wound. Perhaps they had been disappointed before. Perhaps trust had once cost them something. Perhaps they had learned to expect abandonment before affection could become permanent. And because of that, when something between you became emotionally intense, their mind searched for danger before their heart searched for truth. That was never completely about you. Yet you felt the consequences. You felt the hesitation. You felt the emotional walls. You noticed when their warmth changed. You wondered whether you had imagined the connection. And perhaps the most painful part was not being rejected. It was being misunderstood. Because rejection says, "I see you, but I cannot choose this." Misunderstanding says, "I have decided who you are without truly seeing you." Those are very different wounds. And your person is beginning to recognize the difference. That recognition has made them look back at themselves in ways they did not expect. They are asking questions that make them uncomfortable. Why did I assume the worst? Why did I believe fear before I believed what I had experienced? Why did I let silence answer questions that only an honest conversation could answer? Why did I expect them to keep proving themselves when I was giving them so little emotional safety in return? And then came the question that broke something open inside them. What if they became distant because I hurt them? They were not prepared for the emotion attached to that possibility. Because suddenly they remembered the subtle changes in you. The way you became quieter. The way you stopped reaching as often. The way your energy seemed to withdraw without anger. You did not necessarily create a dramatic ending. You simply began protecting what remained of your peace. And now they understand that. They understand that sometimes a person does not leave because love disappears. Sometimes they step back because constantly defending their heart becomes exhausting. That realization brought tears they had not planned to shed. There was no performance in those tears. No one needed to see them. They were private. The kind of tears that arrive when the heart finally catches up to something the mind resisted for too long. And while they were sitting with those emotions, another truth surfaced. They missed you differently than before. Before, they may have missed your presence. Now they missed the version of themselves that existed when they still had the opportunity to understand you correctly. That difference matters. Because missing someone can be nostalgia. But regretting how you treated something meaningful can become transformation. And this is where the story becomes deeper. Your soulmate began mentally returning to specific things they once criticized about you. Traits they misunderstood. Choices they questioned. Boundaries they interpreted incorrectly. Suddenly, some of those very things began making sense. They realized that your boundaries were not always rejection. Sometimes they were self-respect. Your independence was not proof that you did not need love. Sometimes it was proof that you had learned not to abandon yourself just to keep someone close. Your quietness was not always secrecy. Sometimes it was discernment. Your emotional caution was not coldness. Sometimes it was the memory of what happened the last time you gave someone access to your heart before they had learned how to hold it. And as each realization arrived, their old picture of you became harder to maintain. They could no longer comfortably call you what they had once called you in their mind. They could no longer reduce your actions to simple explanations. You became complicated again. Human again. Tender again. Real again. And strangely, that frightened them more than the misunderstanding did. Because misunderstanding gave them distance. Understanding brought responsibility. Once they saw your heart differently, they had to confront what they had done with it. They began wondering whether they still had time. Not because some clock was literally counting down, but because hearts change when they are left waiting too long. People heal. People grow. People stop standing at doors that never open. And your soulmates suddenly realized something they had never seriously considered before. You might not always be emotionally available to the version of them that refused to understand you. That thought created a new urgency inside their heart. Not panic. Clarity. They realized that if they ever came toward you again, they could not return carrying the same assumptions. They could not expect you to reopen emotionally simply because they finally understood what you had been trying to show them. Understanding is the beginning. Repair requires more. And this is precisely what they began thinking about after the tears stopped. What would I actually say? The question seemed simple. It was not. They imagined saying, "I was wrong." But those 3 words felt too small. They imagined saying, "I misunderstood you." Still too small. They imagined saying, "I'm sorry." Necessary, perhaps, but somehow incomplete. Because what they wanted to explain was bigger than an apology. They wanted you to know that something inside them had changed. They wanted you to know that they finally saw the pattern. They finally recognized how fear had influenced their interpretation of you. They finally understood why certain things you said carried so much emotion. And there was one thing in particular they desperately wished they could take back. One moment. One reaction. One assumption. This is the part they have barely admitted even to themselves. There was a moment when you needed understanding from them, and instead of giving you understanding, they gave you doubt. You may not even realize how often they replay it now. They remember the emotional atmosphere. They remember what was said. They remember what was not said. And most painfully, they remember what happened afterward. Something changed between you. Perhaps only slightly at first. But they can see it now. That was one of the moments when your heart began stepping backward. Not because you wanted revenge. Because something inside you quietly realized, I cannot force someone to understand what they have already decided not to see. Your soulmate sees that turning point now. And when they saw it clearly, another tear fell. Because suddenly they understood that they had been waiting for you to return to an emotional place they themselves had helped make unsafe. That realization humbled them. Yet heaven would not reveal this story merely to place blame on another heart. No, beloved. There is something here for you too. You have spent enough time wondering whether being misunderstood meant you were unworthy of being understood. It does not. You have spent enough nights mentally rewriting conversations, imagining the perfect sentence that might have made someone finally see your intentions. But love cannot survive forever as a courtroom where one person is constantly presenting evidence of their goodness. At some point, both hearts must become willing witnesses to each other's truth. You were never meant to spend your entire life proving that your heart deserves gentle interpretation. And perhaps this season has been teaching you something your soulmate is only beginning to learn. Love without discernment becomes self-abandonment. Patience without boundaries becomes exhaustion. Forgiveness without change becomes repetition. But when love is joined with truth, accountability, courage, and self-respect, something entirely different becomes possible. Your soulmate is standing at the edge of that lesson now. And something unexpected happened after their emotional realization. They did not immediately reach for you. They almost did. Their hand moved toward the place where they could contact you. They thought about writing something. They imagined your name appearing before them. Their heart raced at the thought of breaking the silence. Then they stopped. Not because the feeling disappeared. Because suddenly they were afraid of saying the wrong thing again. Imagine the irony. Once, They may have believed you were the difficult one to understand. Now they are discovering how difficult it is to express what they themselves have been hiding. They began composing words in their mind, deleting them, rewriting them, making them longer, then shorter. They wanted to sound sincere without sounding desperate. They wanted to acknowledge the past without reopening every wound. They wanted to tell you they finally understood without expecting you to instantly trust their transformation. And beneath every imagined sentence was one vulnerable truth. I wish I had seen you sooner. That was the sentence their heart kept returning to. Not sooner in life. Sooner in truth. They wished they had recognized what your quiet actions meant before you became tired of explaining them. They wished they had trusted the connection before fear convinced them to investigate every imperfect detail. They wished they had asked you questions instead of answering those questions alone. And now they are facing something every heart eventually faces when it realizes it misjudged someone important. They cannot change yesterday. They can only decide who they become after understanding it. That decision is still forming. Do not mistake this message as a command to wait for anyone. Your life is not a waiting room. Keep growing. Keep healing. Keep choosing peace. Because if another person truly learns from losing emotional closeness with you, their lesson must become visible through their actions, not merely through beautiful thoughts they never communicate. And your soulmate knows this more than they did before. That is why they are thinking beyond an apology now. They are thinking about courage. They are thinking about honesty. They are thinking about whether they are finally strong enough to let you see the parts of them that created the misunderstanding in the first place. Because there is a secret beneath their regret. Something they never told you. Their judgment of you was not created only by what they thought you had done. Part of it was created by what they felt for you. Yes. Their feelings became stronger than they were prepared to manage. And when people become emotionally vulnerable before they feel safe, the mind sometimes begins searching for reasons to retreat. Suddenly flaws look larger. Silence looks suspicious. Small uncertainties become enormous. Not because the connection means nothing. Sometimes because it means too much. They were frightened by how deeply you could affect them. And instead of admitting, "You matter to me enough to scare me," they allowed fear to whisper another explanation. Maybe this isn't real. Maybe they don't care. Maybe I misunderstood everything. Maybe I should pull away before I become the one who gets hurt. But there was a problem. Distance did not erase the connection. It amplified what had been left unresolved. They expected time to make you smaller inside their heart. Instead, certain memories became louder. A laugh. A conversation. A moment of unexpected tenderness. Something you said casually that they now understand differently. The strange familiarity of your presence. The feeling that around you, some guarded part of them almost wanted to become honest. These things remained. And eventually they could no longer pretend their emotional reaction was simply about disappointment. There was love tangled inside the fear. There was attachment tangled inside the avoidance. There was longing tangled inside the judgment. And once they recognized that, their entire interpretation of the past began rearranging itself. But beloved, there is still one revelation you have not heard. The realization that made them cry was not the final realization. Something happened afterward. Something small on the surface. Something they were not expecting. A detail reached them. Perhaps through a memory, a conversation, an observation, or an unexpected piece of information within this fictional unfolding. Whatever its form, it confirmed something about you they had previously doubted. And when they understood what it meant, they became completely still. Because this was no longer merely their heart reconsidering you. There was now something they could not easily explain away. Something that forced them to revisit the exact assumption that had created the distance between you. Their first reaction was disbelief. Their second was silence. Their third was emotion. And then came regret. Deep regret. Because the truth they were beginning to understand revealed that while they had been protecting themselves from something they feared you might do, you had quietly been doing something completely different. Something they never knew. Something you never announced. Something that could change the meaning of everything that happened between you. They have not told you what they discovered. They have not told anyone the full depth of what it did to them. But now they are considering doing something they were too afraid to do before. Not simply contacting you. Not simply apologizing. Something more vulnerable. They want to tell you why they doubted you in the first place. They want to reveal what they were protecting. They want to admit what they felt when they pushed you away. And most of all, they want to tell you what they discovered after they finally looked at the situation without fear. But there is one final obstacle standing between their realization and that conversation. It is not another person. It is not distance. It is not pride in the way you might expect. It is a question. A question they are terrified to ask because they know your answer could change everything. They have repeated it silently more than once. They have imagined asking you directly. They have imagined your expression when you hear it. And every time they get close to finding the courage, their heart hesitates because the question forces them to confront the one possibility they never prepared themselves for. What if you have already healed enough to stop wanting what they are finally ready to give? That possibility has changed the way they see time. And tonight, inside this unfolding story, their heart is moving closer to a decision. Yet there is something they still do not know. The very thing they discovered about you, the truth that broke their certainty, softened their judgment, and brought tears to their eyes, was only the first half of what was hidden. There is another piece. A deeper piece. And when that second truth comes into view, they will finally understand why you became silent, what you were protecting when you stepped back, and what you almost told them before everything changed. Because there was a moment when you nearly revealed something from your heart. They missed it. They misunderstood it. And now, for the first time, they are beginning to realize exactly what you were trying to say.